With the disappointing iPad Pro refresh and the 10th generation iPad that looks nice but costs a lot more than we expected and has a few really weird limitations, Apple also released the new Apple TV 4K, and it might actually be the product that is the most reasonable out of this whole launch. Now, I've been a user of the Apple TV for close to a decade now just because of how well it integrates into Apple's ecosystem, the menu system, being able to use Siri to find what you're wanting to look for, and much more. And with this one, I wanna share with you guys every single difference, what has changed, and also some limitations and some weird specs from Apple. Now, right out of the get-go, Apple is advertising their Apple TV service, their shows, which are great. And with that, they don't really focus on the specs at all. They're just focusing on the experience, some extra features and apps that you can use with it. Apple's Arcade, the Photos app, which I love using because it's connected to my iCloud and Apple account. But I wanna get into the actual specs and why I ordered one right away. And of course, that's coming in November. Now, the first biggest difference is the price. It is now $129 compared to $179, and that is thanks to Apple killing off the Apple TV HD, which was actually 149 bucks. It was more expensive. And that thing used a processor from the iPhone 6, which came out in 2014. So it's crazy that they were still selling it at that price point. So that's a drop of $50. But if you look closer, the base storage is now doubled. And if you wanted to get 64 gig last year, that actually cost you $200, which means it's a $70 difference. And this year you can actually get up to 128 for 20 bucks more. So now the pricing is way better than before. But with that, if you get that 128 gig model, you also get gigabit Ethernet, which you got before, and Thread networking support. Thread is used to seamlessly connect hundreds of products like door locks, thermostats, appliances, and much more. They can actually talk to each other, expand your range. So that is great, but that actually was included with last year's Apple TV 4K, and that means that if you go ahead and buy that base model, that is no longer included and you lose Ethernet. Now, Apple actually made this Apple TV 4K smaller and lighter. Now, it's funny that people are talking about, well, you know, that's a huge improvement, obviously sarcastically, because weight doesn't matter. In fact, it's actually worse because you do have cables sticking out the back that can tug on that. Now, they're able to do that because they removed the fan cooling that was in there before, and now it's fanless. A lot of people said they don't even know that there was a fan in there because it was so quiet, and that is because they went with the A15, which is 5 nanometer. It's more efficient than the A12 that we had previously. I'll talk about performance here in just a bit and one little weirdness about it, but with that, I would say they should definitely spend the extra 20 bucks, not only to get the storage, but the extra features. Now with that, we have a change to the remote. Now this remote they released last year, replacing that flat one, and it was a nice upgrade in my opinion, but it had a lightning connector, and now we have USB Type-C, which I think they should have just done right away. I don't keep lightning cables around. We use wireless charging, so when it's time to charge, it's a bit of a pain, but USB Type-C we do have. Now I personally use Wi-Fi, and thankfully it has been improved, even though it's still Wi-Fi 6. It has a 2x2 MIMO, multiple in, multiple out, instead of a 1x1. And sometimes in my basement, I do have issues with the connection speed, so that is gonna be nice. Now, what I'm more interested in is the addition of HDR10+. Now, not everything uses that. A lot of things use Dolby Vision, but in certain apps like YouTube, for example, or Amazon Prime, you can use HDR10+, and that adds extra metadata to your HDR, which makes sure that the HDR content looks its best for your display, and it could definitely make a noticeable difference. And that was a downside previously, not having that. Now, I would think that they could add that in to the previous Apple TV 4K, but I guess it is just with this one. Now, as far as the video output, this thing has HDMI 2.1, which means it could support 4K 60 with HDR. It could also support 4K 120 and 8K for that connection, But Apple is not allowing you to do that. It is just locked into 4K 60. Now that is a bummer because my Xbox, for example, it could support 4K 120. Now I don't know if Apple is going to add that in the future. For example, 8K YouTube videos can stream that, but this device wouldn't support that with that AV1 as well. And I don't think Apple is probably gonna add that until they have their own content that could support it, and then they might even lock it down to buying a new Apple TV to do so, even though that HDMI connector can do so. And now let's talk about the A15 that is in this device compared to the A12 in last year's generation. That is a big jump, and Apple said that we're gonna get a 50% improvement in performance for the CPU, and the graphics is a little different. Now, if you take a look at the scores from those chips, we have a big jump in single core performance, larger than the 50% they quoted, and as far as multi-core performance, we have the same thing. It is basically double the performance, with Apple only quoting 50%. Now I mentioned that we no longer have the fan in this updated model, it's just using passive cooling, and that might be why their quoted performance that still sounds great doesn't match up to the actual tests we have from these chips in other Apple devices. Now, when we move over to Metal, if you're doing gaming, decoding, all that stuff, they quoted a 30% improvement. But looking at the scores for those chips, we literally have more than double the performance comparing the A12 to the A15 in Metal. And based off of their 30% that they gave, which sounds good, that would only bring us up to about 7,000 estimated Metal score, not over 11,000, which is what the A15 is capable of. And that's the A15 in the iPhone 13. That's the 4-core GPU model, not the 5-core that came in the iPhone 13 Pros or the new iPhone 14s, which are even more powerful. So why do we have such a discrepancy in the actual performance compared to what it should be? Well, I think for one, we don't really need that level of performance. As I mentioned, we don't have 4K 120 out of that HDMI, it's limited 4K 60. The games aren't that difficult, but I think it might just be because of that passive cooling. They want sustained performance, and maybe capping it down just lowers the power usage. They think it's gonna do well enough. And of course, I think the biggest change, why they're giving it A15, which sounds impressive, but the performance is not A15 performance, is just because they're mass manufacturing those chips. The A15 costs, I think, less than half of what the A16 costs, and they're no longer making devices with the older chips. So why not, throw that in there? They're gonna cap it down. Maybe even there's worse performing chips that just don't bin as well. They're gonna toss that in there. And of course, your device here is $129 or $149, not a very expensive, iPad or iPhone. So with all that said, who should upgrade to this new Apple TV 4K? Well, if you have the HD version, which they were still selling up until now, of course that is a no-brainer. And even if you have the Apple TV 4K, which I think was 2017 when that one came out, it is a no-brainer because we have so much more formats, the hardware decoding, way better performance as well. You can do 4K 60 with HDR. That's gonna be a really nice jump. You also have the new remote instead of the previous flat, candy bar style remote. So I like that as far as an improvement. That is worth it. But if you have one from last year, which has that same remote, not that much of a difference, well, I think for most people, it is not gonna be worth it. Now, of course, I mentioned I ordered it. It's gonna be coming in November. And I think for me, having the HDR 10 Plus, knowing that the HDR content from YouTube, from Amazon Prime, from the Google Play Store, that it's gonna look its best, that is great. Also, the better reception, because they don't have Ethernet over there. Having that better connection is gonna be nice, and being able to charge that remote with the cables I actually do have around, that's gonna be good as well. And I've had a couple stutters occasionally. I don't know what was going on. So maybe the performance will be improved. But you guys let me know what you think. And with that, if you guys wanna check out one of those great iPad videos right there, they're super interesting. If you haven't seen them yet, check them out. Click that circle above to subscribe. This has been Max, and I'll see you in the next one.